board meeting. I'll call the meeting to order and request a roll call, please.
Mr. Newmoth is absent. He's at a tennis match. He's hoping to make it soon. Ms. Kalinowski? Present. Mr. Bush?
Here.
Vice President Darrow is absent. I don't know where he is. And President McClellan.
Here. Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, now to tonight's agenda. Any additions or corrections?
No, thank you.
Okay, with none, I would entertain a motion for approval of tonight's agenda.
Second.
Mr. Bush, Ms. Kalinowski, roll call, please.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski? Yes. President McClellan?
Yes. That brings us to discussion items, and our first item tonight is our 1920 Continuous Improvement Plan. Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you, President McClellan, members of the Board of Education. Tonight we're going to talk about the 2019-2020 draft continuous improvement plan. As I shared with the Board of Education and Dr. Mamais talked about at our last Board of Education meeting, final report card data for the 2018-19 school year will be released by the Ohio Department of Education before the end of this week. In anticipation of that, we start the process based upon the data that has been released and the disaggregation done by the administrative team to date to talk about benchmark goals specifically for the 2019-2020 school year. So we're going to walk through the draft continuous improvement plan that's proposed. It will be presented at your September 23rd Board of Education meeting in final format for board adoption. Pursuant to the terms and conditions of employment with the Plain Local Education Association, we have to notify the Teachers Association prior to September 30th for what will be the academic achievement goal, benchmark number 1 for the 2019-2020 school year. So tonight you provide preliminary reactions and input to the work that's been done by the leadership team. Then the next step is we'll have an alternative compensation committee meeting required by the Plain Local Education Association master contract that will occur prior to your September 23rd board meeting. And Mr. Darrow and Mr. Newmoff are the board designees to that committee, so they will be present to represent the Board of Education in any conversations or perspectives you may have related to the first academic achievement goal that we'll talk about tonight. And then it'll come back full circle in final format at the board meeting on September 23rd, where we'll present publicly the final outcomes of the local report card results released by the department later this week and how they specifically tie to the continuous improvement plan. So, recalling the original work done by the Board of Education and the administration, our commitment to excellence, and we aspire by 2023 to be ranked in the top 10 or higher of all public school districts for student achievement in the state of Ohio, as reported by the Ohio Department of Education based upon the Performance Index ranking. As our long-term commitment, we aspire to become and remain the best rated school district in the state. So I'm not recommending, nor do I believe you are, but I will ask the question, any updates or changes to the commitment to excellence, because I think that is still the commitment we've made. Depending on the results that come out later this week, that will determine our ranking. If for some reason we become ranked in the top 10, we will adjust the commitment to excellence like we did last year when we far exceeded our goal of being ranked in the top 5%. So pending any additional information from the data later this week, I recommend the commitment to excellence stay the same. Any questions or feedback related to the commitment? I think this is easier if we do it in sections. So this is going to be board participation with the superintendent, and we're going to go back and forth.
I feel like my classroom. This is virtually unchanged from what was previously, except for the top 10. So I think consistency is key.
It's good to remind any others. Okay. Moving on, focus. Our focus remains unchanged. All employees will be accountable for implementing research-based practices, including a rigorous and aligned curriculum, common assessments, focused instruction, and data-driven decisions to achieve the best academic and developmental outcomes for every student within a fiscally sustainable budget. That is the daily culture expectation across the learning campus, and I would recommend that it stays the same for consistency because it is working. Any feedback?
Read on that too.
Great. Benchmarks and indicators. So benchmark number one is for increasing the overall academic achievement across the school district. This is determined by the performance index rating, which is basically the component on the local report card that represents the number of students who pass through state assessments and how well they specifically perform on each assessment. It also includes the indicator that measures the percentage of students related to chronic absenteeism for school attendance as well. So for benchmark number one, based upon leadership conversations, again, we will not know the district ranking for the 2018-19 school year until later this week when the department releases that information. The goal this past year was to increase our ranking from number 19 to number 17 or better out of the 611 public school districts across the state. Based upon conversations and changes that the department's actually recommending, we're actually modifying this goal, still related to performance index, but changing it from a ranking measure to strictly an academic achievement measure based upon the student performance on the required assessments across the state, meaning the performance index score itself, specifically for New Albany. Our commitment to excellence includes the ranking element. I'm recommending that we switch from ranking to PI specifically because the State Department of Education is changing the report card during the 2019-2020 school year across the state. In preparation for the class of 2023, graduation requirements are being modified by the state of Ohio. State legislation actually changed in the biennial budget that came out in June from the state, and the State Board of Education has since taken subsequent action to change the graduation requirements. So as we look towards the future, the number of state assessments that have been administered historically are going to change in the state. Specifically, ELA 1 will no longer be administered at the high school level, and geometry is pending a state waiver to the federal government. So in state statute, they've actually eliminated the ELA 1 assessment at the high school level, and they've eliminated the geometry assessment for end of course exams. The state has to apply for a federal waiver specifically in relationship to geometry because it is a federal requirement based upon federal funding that's received by schools in Ohio that geometry be administered. The state has submitted a waiver pursuant to the change in state statute and action by the State Board of Education, asking the federal government to no longer require geometry in the state of Ohio because of the change in state statute and board adopted action for changing graduation requirements. Those two variables will have an impact across the school districts in the state of Ohio, and it impacts us specifically also in our gifted indicators for the number of students that score at the accelerated or advanced levels. Knowing that, we've done preliminary assessment work to look at actual number of students that score at the advanced and accelerated levels, specifically in geometry and ELA 1, ELA 2, or ELA 1, and geometry specifically, the tests are proposed to go away, and it will have an impact to the performance index. So using today's numbers, Dr. Mamias has calculated that if we actually eliminate the geometry test and the ELA test, our current 106, which was an increase from last year from 105.6 to 106 this year. So we did administer over 223 new assessments to students across the school district, but our performance index actually increased. So academic achievement went up. However, when you recalculate the PI using today's test score data that's available, just remove the geometry scores and she removed the ELA scores, and our current PI without those two scores would be 105.6. So it actually decreases because you're eliminating assessments from the actual calculation. So based upon those changes, we're recommending that minimally, and again, this is a to be determined in the conversation, that when we shift to a PI score for academic achievement for benchmark number 1, it should be greater than 106. So although we're eliminating the ELA for sure, and potentially the geometry, the leadership team still feels confident that with a decrease in the PI because of those two tests being eliminated from our scores, that we can still have the aspiration and expectation that we should increase the overall academic achievement across the school district. So the 106 on paper becomes potentially 105.6 if both tests are eliminated, and we would still have the expectation that we would exceed the 106 score earned this year. I'm gonna leave that open-ended to tell you that the rest of that story comes after we see the comparative data to other school districts on Thursday. I have no idea how the other school districts in the state of Ohio have done in relationship to the actual data, full data release, because it will not come out from the department until Thursday. So during the course of the next 2 weeks before your Board of Education meeting, we'll have conversations. I will contact you individually to talk about this specific benchmark based upon additional data that we'll get at the end of this week. The leadership team will look at the data when it's released on Thursday. We will continue to determine what we think is absolutely achievable, because the benchmark needs to be achievable, but at the same time create stretch and growth. But again, the elimination of ELA 1 and or potentially geometry still creates stretch and growth required to get back to 106. But again, I want to see what that means in comparison to our other comparable school districts and the high achieving school districts throughout the state that we're comparing ourselves against. So I'm going to pause there on benchmark number 1 and give you an opportunity to react to the direction we're going, knowing that you don't have the rest of the story. But shifting from a ranking number specifically to holding ourselves accountable for individual achievement by our students in New Albany by increasing the performance index score.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about getting away from the ranking kind of metric, like what the thinking is?
Okay, so the other part of the conversation, this has come out in conversations with the Plain Local Education Association within the school district, is that there's some discussion going on in the world of ranking. Number one, we don't rank our students. We do not do class rank. We don't do that to kids because you're not a number. It's really been part of the conversation. So that comparison's being made in other situations, i.e. this situation, that if we don't rank students, then why are we ranking ourselves as a school district when compared to other schools, rather than actually holding ourselves accountable for the levels of student achievement and performance that we should be demonstrating for continuous improvement. The other part of the conversations become that in order, and I would turn this into a positive, but I'm gonna say it in a negative fashion just to make it real. In order for our ranking to increase, students in another school district have to do poorly for academic achievement. So they decrease. Our ranking goes up when another school district underperforms our students, and I would argue our students are outperforming students. I would make it a negative, I would turn it into a positive. But I would tell you, just part of the conversation that is currently going on, to be honest, is that for our ranking to go up in the state, we're actually hoping that other students may do worse than our students. And my answer to that is, it's not about doing worse, it's about our students outperforming other students because they're better prepared and they're demonstrating the learning and growth that we expect them to demonstrate on a daily basis. Is that what you were asking for?
Yep.
So it's a shift from a ranking in the current conversation to focusing on PI. We still account for, as I stated before, in the commitment to excellence, we still aspire to be in the top 10 by 2023 with the aspiration of becoming the highest performing school district in the state. That doesn't change. It's just what we're holding ourselves accountable to, and I don't know what this number is. Right now I'm telling you it's greater than 106, even with the variables at ELA 1 and geometry that are currently in play with changes in state statute and how the local report card is going to be calculated.
I'm comfortable moving away from the ranking just because I've been in a district that's really focused on rank, and it can make people crazy. And we can lose sight of the real objective, which is
Increasing academic achievement.
yes, and not chasing, the best standardized testing we can get. And I think inherent in improving the PI, I would think that we will continue to increase our rank if we continue to increase our PI. So I think it makes sense.
We'll know for sure, but if you recall from last year when we showed you the school districts and we were number 19 and our aspirations to be 17, there were fractions of a decimal point separating many school districts in the ranking list. The higher we climb, the closer it gets, the harder it is. That was the list. I suspect, and I haven't seen it, I would love to have seen it, but I don't have access to it anymore. That list at the department that'll come out on Thursday.
I would only comment that I think, go back to our statement of purpose is to be the best. And I think we looked at this a couple of years ago trying to find what was the most objective ranking that we could find. And I believe at the time we settled as a board that it was in fact this particular ranking. And I'm open to dialogue and discussion. I think my initial concern hearing if we go back to the performance index, we need to continue to accelerate our students' performance. And if we go to 106, that doesn't mean that we could arguably have dropped in the rankings significantly if we have other districts that are executing better on their curriculum and having their students outperform ours. So I just think it gets a little bit squishy in terms of how are we accelerating and advancing our rate of growth of our students in this district if we go strictly to that 106 or to that performance index ranking as opposed to the overall ranking. So
The only thing that I would add is that if we had the expectation of continuous growth and it's always a higher number than the current PI that's been earned, then we're still increasing academic achievement. The question becomes, what is that number? And I don't know right now because I don't have the rest of the information and the rest of the data, short of the fact that I'm telling you it needs to be greater than 106 because that's this year's number, regardless of the changes that the state's making related to ELA 1 and geometry. Because we should still have, to Paul's point, an expectation for continuous growth and higher levels of achievement based upon the work that's supposed to be happening within the school district.
I've gotten the sense from some of the presentations from the state testing that sometimes we're surprised maybe by the results or the way that the test was not necessarily structured, but maybe the content of the test. So can you maybe talk a little bit about kind of the blind side of we don't know, so it's great we know a couple tests are getting eliminated, we don't know how the test content may be changing, and then how does that impact the district's ability to continue to grow? Everyone may drop because of that.
Right. So to your point, there are variables annually within state testing from the State Department and its administration. As a school district, we receive academic content standards and we receive a test blueprint of what the expectations are within the specific assessment. But there are multiple forms of the assessments. That's typical. Even though they're now computerized and they exist for kids to take the tests online short of third grade, which has a paper pencil option. But it's going through an electronic process that you see different types of questions. You never know which test administration you're receiving until you sign in and take the test. And the test that Mike may be taking is not the same as the one that Debbie may be taking sitting next to you in the classroom. It could be a different form of the test. But there's an aggregate for statistical reliability in the test that the difficulty level that you're receiving is the same difficulty level that Debbie's receiving. The questions could be in a different numerical order, there could be a different test format, or Debbie may get an opinion response and you may get something that's not for written response in the essay. Debbie may get to get an opinion and you may not. You may have to give an interpretive response for fact-based. So it changes based upon the test format. But again, when it all comes back together in the aggregate for what the state does, there's statistical reliability in what's being presented. It's just that on a day-to-day basis, it might look different when you're actually taking the test.
But on a year-to-year basis, is the state making significant changes, or do they make changes sometimes in the test content?
There are, and that information's published. You don't know what it looks like until the test is over, and if any of the item analysis actually provides release of specific test items, because we don't get to see the tests. I mean, none of that happens.
Sure.
Teachers, when they're administering the test, aren't even allowed to read the test over the student's shoulder. It's a violation of test security protocols. So you're not given access to that information, but yes, on an annual basis, there could be some differential or differentiating factor within a specific assessment that the state's administering.
I guess the point I'm getting at is, so we're eliminating a couple tests that are dropping our score overall. Maybe it's dropping us more or less significantly than other districts. For the upcoming school year, if
the state makes some changes and makes some of the tests more difficult, maybe we're not able to attain 106, but we actually grow 5 or 7 ranking points, which would be a positive. By holding on to just a numerical number, could we potentially be more at the hands of the test itself rather than our students' performance relative to other districts, which is really the most, substantive way for us to measure growth.
And I understand that. When you go back to benchmark number 1, the premise behind it was to demonstrate increased academic achievement levels on a year-over-year basis. To do that, the performance index score must go up. So that's the reality of it. The ranking piece came into play when we originally developed the continuous improvement plan to go back to the aspiration, to Paul's point, to be the best in the state, which we've accounted for in the commitment to excellence. So this holds us accountable in the current conversation that the aspiration's still there in the commitment to excellence by a school district, but our target that we're measuring is performance index. We want absolute academic achievement levels to increase. And to your point, and that might be the reality this year, because I don't know what our ranking is, and Paul said it, our ranking could have gone up, it may have gone down, despite the fact that academic achievement levels went up in the school district. We administered 223 more assessments during the 2018-19 school year, and we went from a 105.6 to a 106.0 in the current calculation. So academic achievement went up, and I don't know what our ranking is. But even going up, we might have declined, to Paul's point, that I don't know that on an annual basis. The one thing I know that we're responsible for and that we're accountable to do is to increase academic achievement levels, which is the PI score.
So I'm going to try and use an analogy here. Hopefully this works. I was thinking about, Paul, by the way, tennis, we win?
I wasn't there to the end, but
Okay.
we had things well at the end.
Good, good. Cross country. One of the unique things about cross country is that everybody's cheering for everybody. And I just want to go back, and I don't want to stay on this point, but I think we do need to be careful about the glass half empty versus the glass half full approach on this. The idea that we would be rooting for other school districts or other students to not perform is not what this is about. It's about the performance of our kids. Cross country, one of those sports where you cheer for everybody. You can have a runner that ends up with their own personal record, and they end up running a race and doing really well. But then the next race, they do just as well again, but someone worked a little bit harder and got ahead of them the next time. It's not that they didn't succeed, it's just that someone else did a little bit better that time. To your point about, there are all kinds of variables that happen. Could have been what they ate for breakfast, could have been the weather, who knows? I think that in this case, we're talking about next year's benchmark. So this year's benchmark was 19 to 17. We're going to see if we hit it or not. Next year, maybe this is the right way to look at it, performance index. Then review it again. I mean, it's not like we're making a decision here that's going to last forever. I think there are so many variables, so many things that we don't know. I appreciate the administration's review of this and the recognition that we could actually do better and drop in the rankings. It could happen. We don't know.
I don't know.
And so the question is, what is it that we want to reward? We want to reward our student success. And student success may not necessarily mean going from 19 to 17 or 17 to 16. At the end of the day, we still want to have a top 10 district in the state. That's our overarching goal. And we have until 2023, I think, right? So maybe look at it that way. It's of course we want every child to succeed, the ones in our school district and the ones elsewhere. And they're running their own race and they're running at their own pace. We need to do everything that we can to support them and get them to the highest levels of achievement that we can. And that's the only variable really that we can control. So I don't know if that helps, but that over the next couple of weeks, of course, as more numbers come out, we might be able to coalesce around what this really needs to be.
Again, the purpose of tonight is to introduce the concept. We need additional data. It will not be available until the end of the week from the department. When it comes out, leadership will spend time, trust me, going through it in great detail to try to determine what we should recommend. It will require, and I will follow up with you, because I laid out the timeline. So tonight's the introduction. We have until a week from Thursday before the Alternative Compensation Committee meets that Paul and Phil sit on as the board designees, because it's a requirement by contract to solicit input from the teachers. But that input starts with us giving them some direction of where we're going. So they have some idea of what the expectation is that we would say is the performance incentive requirement specifically for academic achievement for the 2019-20 school year. Then it comes back to the board on the 23rd. And then again, by board contract, or by negotiated agreement through the master contract, must be published to the teachers by September 30th. That's the timeline. Any other questions or comments related to benchmark number 1?
I guess I just would comment, and again, I'm completely open to discussion and appreciate the dialogue here tonight, but as I look at our overall commitment to getting to the top 10, I could certainly see when we hit that top 10, that goal, that at that point, we maybe start looking at a different measure because we've achieved that and we want to reward staying at that level. But if we've set our goal to be at the top 10, and we switch to a performance index that risks, and we're actually dropping back in the rankings despite having achievement, I feel like that, we just need to think that through, because it runs a bit counter to our stated goals in our 2023 vision. I also just think, I'd love to see the research, not sure how far back the data could go, but back a couple of years ago, we were ranked 65th in the state. I don't know whether we perhaps had a couple of years there where maybe we bumped up that PI, but still we're in the 65th position. So that's certainly not where we want to be. We don't want to go back to the 65th spot in the state. We want to stay in this top 20 trajectory moving toward what we all know and our kids are achieving, and with the assistance of great faculty and a new enhanced curriculum. So yeah, absolutely open to dialogue here, but I do think it runs the risk of getting a little bit squishy in terms of how I know I've used that word twice now, but think about how that might play out going forward.
Sure. So benchmark number 2, still related to academic achievement, specifically for the progress component. So this is for a year or more of growth for every year of instruction. We're actually proposing to modify benchmark number 2 to be earn a progress component grade of B or better on the local report card. This actually is an increase in expectations from what we previously have stated. The original to demonstrate at least a year's worth of growth or higher on the district component is a C or better on the local report card. So we're actually proposing increasing it to a B or better on the local report card. And you may recall that the progress component really essentially recognizes that not all children start at the same place with their learning, but every student should learn and grow throughout the school year. Progress specifically looks at the growth of all students that they're making based upon state assessments in reading and math for grades 4 through 8, and then ELA and math at the high school for end of course exams only. And again, this progress measure is going to be impacted both by the elimination of ELA 1 and potentially geometry. So this one also has an impact depending on what the federal government says in response to the state's request for a waiver. However, even with that said, we are recommending that we increase the expectation to be B or better rather than the C that's required in the local report card. Questions or feedback? Okay, benchmark number 3 is related to gap closure. So this is the component that specifically looks at how all students are performing for specific at-risk populations. So schools are required to close the achievement gap that exists between groups of students that may be based on income, race, ethnicity, or disability. So the gap component shows how well schools are meeting their performance expectations for these vulnerable students in English language arts, math, and graduation, are the areas that are counted within the specific subgroups themselves. The subgroups include all students, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian Pacific Islander, Black non-Hispanic, Hispanic, multiracial, white non-Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and English language learners. So in this specific case, we're recommending, based upon our continued practice within the school district, that we sustain what we've been doing the last 2 years and earn a gap closing component grade of A on the local report card. So we're actually increasing the expectation that we have to sustain the great work that's happened across the school district as now the daily practice of expectation, and hold ourselves accountable to receiving A on the report card. Questions or comments or feedback?
Is there I'm curious just any of the dialogue that's been going on behind the scenes. I mean, do we feel this is just a gimme almost?
No, it's not a gimme. I'd like
No
to
resistance
say
that it's
Um,
going up.
I will tell you that 2 years ago, students with disabilities was a targeted conversation as an example within the school district. And there were specific things put in place related to curriculum, assessment, and instruction to actually increase our practices to better meet the needs of students. This is actually a variable, back to Mike's point, that can change on an annual basis because the composite of your group can change based upon student enrollment. So although we're saying A, I'm going to give you an example. So English learners. The week before school started, we have 75 students identified this school year that needed to go through assessments to determine what additional supports or services were required in English learners. And that's part of this subgroup. So although that is a significant number of students that enroll that are likely qualifying for services during the school day, because English is their second language, we still have a responsibility to meet the needs of that child to help them achieve the best academic developmental outcomes that they can. So that's really been, to your point, Paul, the conversation, and it's been positive. Although this is hard, people believe it's necessary because it's meeting the individual needs of kids. And it's going to require stretch. And so standing here tonight, I will tell you, one of the ones that caused us some conversation is English learners. We did increase the number of teachers currently assigned to serve students that are English learners throughout our school district. We increased at both the primary school level, and then it had a shift for also availability for other services that are being provided to intermediate and middle school based upon where the student population exists. But it's really a K through 12 conversation or a pre-K through 12 conversation that the student gets access, in this case, to services for English learners. So I think it's a stretch. It's not a given. It's hard. But I think it's the right work for the right reasons because every kid should have access to those services to help him or her achieve successfully. Any other questions or comments about benchmark number 3? Okay, benchmark number 4, graduate students who are college and career ready. So this one has remained the same for the state of Ohio. It is changing in the future, and knowing that it's going to change beginning with the class of 2023, we're actually making some modifications to the direction we're going to go. So for benchmark number 4, we propose maintaining the first bullet to continue to earn a grade of A for the graduation rate component on the local report card. Again, we have long-standing history of earning A. That should be the expectation for us as a high-achieving school district. Our students should absolutely graduate. The only variance that happens if Debbie enrolls as a 9th grader and does not graduate 4 years later because she moved to Tahiti, Debbie counts against us. That is still the calculation. That's why no school district in the state of Ohio ever gets 100% in this component, because at least one student will absolutely withdraw from the school district and count against the total. So we believe as a high achieving school district that should stay. The second bullet we're actually suggesting gets struck. So the class of 19, for the ACT score, we will not have that data back from the department or the state level for college readiness from the ACT, likely until late September. It has not been received by the school district. But as the board knows through previous conversations, we're transitioning to the SAT administration to align for consistency for student curriculum access through the guaranteed viable curriculum and the expectations that should exist within standardized assessment beyond the school district. So it allows us to actually align with the PSAT and start offering students at the middle school level, and then what also then happens at the high school level, access all the way through their junior year to a standardized assessment that actually builds based upon the curriculum, gives greater data and report information back both to the school district, the student, and the family. So we're actually proposing the second bullet be struck. There will not be a specific bullet that's recommended related to just the SAT because it's actually incorporated into the third bullet that we're actually proposing to add this evening. So the third bullet is to earn a prepared for success component grade of B or better on the local report card. This is prepared for success is on the local report card today. As one of the 6 component measures that's actually being measured by the state. It actually has multiple sections that are included within it. Both the ACT, the SAT are still included. The number of students that receive an honors diploma within our school district. It also includes information regarding access to advanced placement tests as well as the levels that the students actually score on the AP exam of 3 or better. And it also accounts for students that are enrolled specifically within College Credit Plus, or if students are enrolled in International Baccalaureate, which we do not have, or receive industry-based credentials based upon participation in career technical education. So it's a broader-based goal with the aspiration of looking towards the future because this is the one that actually will be impacted, back to my original conversation, related to the change in graduation requirements beginning with the class of 2023. The current freshman class does have different graduation requirements that have been issued by the State Board of Education. They will have to earn graduation seals, and we will present on that in the future once everything becomes final, because the state's waiting on the approval, again, of its waiver related to geometry, which then would impact our actions on graduation requirements. So we will connect the dots once we know how the rest of the story comes out based upon the state's request for the waiver. But this actually lays the foundation for the future for the graduation seals that will be introduced as a graduation requirement beginning with the class of 2023 and beyond. So we're suggesting in the recommendation this evening that the first bullet remain. We must receive an A for graduation. It's both the 4th and 5th year calculation and the current calculations done by the department on the local report card. Strike the second bullet and keep the third bullet as new and specifically incorporate the entire component related to prepared for success.
Maybe I'm the contrarian tonight, I apologize. I would like to have us at least consider having a reference there to the SAT score. I know we're moving away from ACT. I think, again, a couple things you take away from New Albany when you graduate and you move on, many of our students going on to college, they're looking to have the best SAT score as possible when they want to go to Ohio State or community college or elsewhere. And that's just one objective ranking. I know that I appreciate the work of the team with the PSATs and the multiple opportunities to take that. And I know that that's an objective of our district, but I feel like if you're out there as a parent, as a taxpayer, and you look at the health of a district, that's one, again, sort of simple measure of the success of those students in that district. Look at how they're doing on SAT or an ACT as compared to their peers across the state of Ohio. So I just would, it's sort of an initial reaction to when I think about what you put on your college application. Put that ACT or SAT score on there. You don't put on there prepared for success component with grade P or better. So it's trying to take it back to the individual student and their ability to really excel with quality education.
Good feedback.
I agree with Paul. I think I like the prepared for success component, but I think we should still pull out the SAT to measure it in some way. I think just to even give credit to all the work that's gonna be done moving forward, I'm sure we're gonna see improved SAT scores, so I think it's good for us to keep an eye on that separately, and I'm afraid it could get lost in the prepared for success component if we don't call it out.
Feedback or reaction?
I don't disagree. My only concern with that is, and you guys tell me if this is even correct. How many of our kids take the SAT right now?
Just 20%?
Sorry, I'm trying to think of the spreadsheet that I have that has all of them. I probably, in any given senior class, might have about 50 kids.
Okay, so my only concern is we're switching up the test. Is that really a benchmark that we want to have in the first? I don't mind having it later. I don't mind measuring it, but that would be my concern, is that we're switching tests, and then we have some expectation, and if, what happens if we have a bad year, so,
No, you're right, we need to start with some kind of benchmark.
yeah.
Well, we could talk to SAT and have that conversation, because to your point, it's gonna be my comment. Our kids have not been required, juniors would be required to sit for the SAT. We'd have to find comparison data, because we don't have a first year, all junior class taking the SAT benchmark, to Debbie's point, that then becomes comparative data. So, although Dublin, Arlington, and others, have given the SAT for multiple years to the entire class, we have not. So I don't have, that's where we have to talk about it, to figure out what could we compare it to, because I don't know what our current benchmark score is, because the entire class is not sat for the test.
Do we have the data from the 50 or so students?
Yeah, we have all of that. And we compare it, but again, and we still encourage the kids, because we'll still do that now. Although we've switched because of the vertical alignment of what's happening with the PSAT to the SAT, we would still encourage a student to consider taking the ACT, because it's not the same test. So it could be beneficial that the student might perform differently on the ACT versus the SAT. But because of vertical alignment, the data that becomes available, we're recommending the transition to SAT. So that's the feedback we want, so that's what we're looking for, and we'll continue to dialogue and try to come up with what's the next iteration that gets shared with you, and the conversations that I'll have with you offline, individually, before we get back to September 23rd. It's a giant jigsaw puzzle. We have time. I just don't have all the pieces yet.
I think it's quite fair to say that the board would probably like to see some reference to the SAT in that.
Beyond the Prepared for Success measure, because it's in the Prepared for Success measure, but it's not in there as a comparison to other students taking the SAT.
Right.
It's just a reporting mechanism in the Prepared for Success. Any other questions or comments on benchmark number 4? Okay, benchmark number 5, enhance school culture and social emotional well-being. So we are recommending the continuation of age-appropriate student surveys to measure a percentage of students who feel safe at school, supported, have at least one adult member to go to. That's done through the social emotional learning survey. We also do a substance use survey. We are proposing making changes related to substance use based upon survey fatigue and the feedback we're getting from kids. That it's maybe not something that's done annually. So much like our DARE program is in specific grade levels, we are likely going to switch and do the substance use survey in off-grade level years, and continue to do the actual social emotional learning survey on an annual basis to ensure that the mental health programming that we're putting in place can help students, which also has the substance component related to it, but not specifically do the substance use survey annually. Most likely change that beginning this school year and do it in off years based upon the feedback from the kids. Because the survey doesn't change. It statistically needs to be the same in order to determine the comparability for what you're actually seeing year over year in the results. So the only one that would change would specifically be that one. We would still do the SEL survey on an annual basis. The piece that we're proposing adding, we've gone from just the administration of the surveys, we now have data that we can look at for longitudinal impact on specific programs and the value that they're adding and to the experiences on a daily basis and helping kids when it goes back to meeting the developmental needs of students. So we're actually proposing adding to implement age-appropriate student programs, including the R factor, to enhance school and district climate, culture, and well-being. So it's broad-based because there's over 20 programs that exist across the school district currently, and on an annual basis, we go through and actually evaluate those programs to determine the impact they're having, and believe that we can incorporate some different questions into the student surveys that have not been present years to date to help us better understand the impact that a specific program's having for kids and or their families. And the family piece will come in benchmark number 7. Because it's a two-prong approach. I need feedback from kids, but I also need information from their parents if their kids are participating in specific programs. And we'll talk about that in benchmark 7 specifically. Any questions or feedback related to benchmark number 5? Kids' voice matters, and it's important for us to find out what they think. That's what number 5 does. Benchmark number 6 is to demonstrate sustainable fiscal management. This has been a year-over-year goal for the Board of Education. As you are aware, it's to reduce district expenditures by at least 1% or greater on an annual basis. So we've done this for the last 2 years within the continuous improvement plan. It's total expenditures within the school district. So this year's number based upon the budget is $605,000. So you may notice, if you recall, last year's number was $627,500. It has decreased because we've done the 1% savings in the last 2 years. So it seems counterintuitive that the number's going down, but we're reducing the budget based upon the savings that's been expected. So that is the reason why. Ms. Jenkins and I, going through and working with the leadership team and going through all the budgetary line items, this is not a give me. There's still some stuff we're looking for. Energy efficiency is one of them, and you're aware that that's coming online in stages through the LED retrofit, but there's all kinds of variables that contribute to this total savings. So it's decreasing the amount of paper that's used, the clicks on a copier, the toner in a machine, the electrical, the lights on, the lights off, leaving the water faucet on in the bathroom, running up the water bill. Anything and everything contributes to the culture called savings related to operations in the school district. So this isn't localized just to operations. It could be a human resource savings because the Board of Education recalls that through the staffing process, if someone resigns or retires from the school district, it's not an autofill. It has to be justified. If the position's still necessary, could it look differently? Could we do it differently before we just post it to fill it? That could contribute to the savings. So minimally, the expectation should be 1%, which is $605,000. Questions, comments, feedback? The more we can save, the better. I understand the look. Benchmark number 7 is to ensure community engagement and stakeholder satisfaction. The Board of Education will recall last year we included a community survey. We actually publicly presented on that survey, and we're actually now going from the administration to implementation as part of this goal. So I'm actually recommending that we modify the first bullet to administer parent and or staff. We do a staff climate survey annually to get feedback, again, voices of our staff members to talk to us and tell us how things are going, what we're doing well and how we can continuously improve, to measure the level of satisfaction with educational quality, school cultures, communication, student services, climate, and or fiscal management. So I've changed this in conversations with the leadership team to incorporate specifically a parent focus in addition to our student surveys and our staff surveys. A parent survey that can include those things, but broadly also student services. And I'm going to use Mrs. Kalinowski as an example. Prior conversations with the Board of Education included the opportunity, for example, to survey our parents related to school counseling services in our school district, or nursing services, or access to the clinic aides, or could be transportation related questions. Any of those things fall under the category of student services. So not knowing what potential questions you might be interested in finding out from our parents, we put in broad-based terms to allow it to be open-ended. So school counseling could be but one example, transportation, nurses, clinic aides, custodial, cleanliness of the building, anything could be under student services. So I've kind of written it that way, so as we think about getting to spring, this would be a spring administration done by the school district, what that potentially could look like. The second part that we added is directly from the results of our community survey, and based upon my conversations with Mr. McClelland, as board president, we specifically targeted implement at least 3 strategies during the 2019-20 school year to increase school district awareness and engagement of senior citizens, and I will define those publicly as persons ages 55 and over, because that was the definition in our community survey. Adults without children enrolled, so that's 70% of New Albany, that does not have a child in our school district, 65 to 70% of New Albany without a child in our school district but a taxpayer, and Plain Township residents specifically, based upon the data, based upon community survey results received. So that's something specific that Mr. McClellan and I have talked about as an action item that could come out as a result of the community survey, because that was the demographic that was described that felt that they had the least amount of information or engagement with the school district. I don't know what those 3 strategies are yet. You'll get to contribute to that. If you have ideas, we're looking for them. But it would be 3 targeted things that we would do differently this school year to try to help increase voice to those 3 respective groups that were identified within the community survey. Questions and feedback or comments?
I had one idea about engaging senior citizens. Is now the time for it?
Sure.
I feel like we have this wealth of talent out there that we could tap into in terms of maybe a volunteer program at the school. There's just so many incredible people who are in our community in that retiree group, and I think they would love to be around the kids.
There are countless volunteers in the district every day, every year. Our challenge becomes finding them. So if you're not the grandparent, aunt, uncle, or relative of a student currently enrolled in the school district, so part of that strategy also has to include how do you get to the 65% of people that don't have kids in the school district that aren't related to a child in the school district that would want to come and volunteer. So that's our challenge in trying to figure out how do we get to those people. So I like the idea, we just have to come up with how we're going to get to them.
Right, those are the types of things that we talked about. The broader thing here is just building a sense of community, right? And if you were at the football game on Friday night, you saw there was the Veterans Appreciation Night, and there was a packed house. I think it was even more people that were there for the opening night. And I ran into all kinds of people who were, don't have kids in the schools, or maybe they're young kids, people whose kids have already graduated. So these are the types of things where when we kind of open up the doors and invite people in, that's what we want. And so the question is, how do we get out and get in front of them, whether it's senior citizens, being over at the Heights Center and engaging more with the people over there to get them to come in. So open to any ideas, but based on the survey results, these are the residents of our community that don't feel like they're as connected, and I think that if they stepped inside the buildings, they'd fall in love. So
It's a good goal.
We just have to identify what the 3 strategies are going to be and how we're going to do it.
I'd be curious as well as how, I'm trying to recall the survey, the population that answered that question, how large of a sample size was it? And then whatever the strategies are, what is our strategy to get to those people to start with, that are not currently attached to the school? I like the idea, I like the goals. I think that some of these are sort of more of initiative type goals for that particular year as opposed to sort of 2023 goals.
Right.
My only concern with this would be feels like we've got a very heavy focus in this school then on that population, which is not, follow my 80-20 principle, probably not the core group that we're working with on a day-to-day basis. So I don't want to lose sight of that group and to go and try to manage this portion of the community survey response. So I can rationalize that though by saying this is something we're trying to respond to with the community survey that we really want to tackle and achieve. I would be curious on what kind of marketing plan or what sort of data we can come up with to help us actually reach those individuals where it's best to reach them.
I would say that it's an and, it's not an or. The daily practice of trying to continue to engage our parents as stakeholders within the educational process will continue. We won't stop doing what we're doing that people were very positive about within the community survey from a parent perspective or from a community member perspective, using the counter, because I would split senior citizens specifically based on the community survey. Senior citizens that are female felt they were in tune, and to be honest with you, the survey said that senior citizens that were male felt they were out of tune. So that's very specific, but it was in the data that John and I went through to try to come up with what else we would suggest for this goal. So I agree, Paul, it is very specific. It's probably a 1 year, then it has to be sustained thereafter, but it's a targeted something to try to help specifically engage a group that identified themselves as disconnected from the schools in the long term.
I agree with that.
Well, just point out, because you're right, Paul, the first bullet, scratches out community and says parents. So the idea is you really continue to drill down on the parents, but this is just an added piece.
That's the CIP for 2019-2020. Are there any other additional comments, questions, or feedback that you'd like to offer? You're also welcome to contact me offline. I will be in touch after we get additional information from the department. The leadership team's committed. I mean, this was the draft, 10 of different things that have been proposed, brainstormed, thought about, pondered upon, researched. We've been around the block on these things many, many times. I know you're seeing it tonight, so you have 2 weeks that you now get to help formally play in the sandbox, individually, offline, with me, not as a group, because that's called a board meeting. So I know, Ms. Jenkins, I'm helping. So please do not violate the sunshine laws. Please do not engage in a conversation where 3 members are participating on this, because then you're deliberating, which is a violation. So you're welcome to email me, text me, call me. We will talk over the course of the next 2 weeks when we actually get into the rest of the data. But right now, I just don't have the rest of the information to help finish the rest of the story. Your feedback will be incorporated, leadership will work on it, and I will continue to update you. Thank you.
Can I take advantage of the fact that we're in a meeting? I want to go back to benchmark number 1, just make a couple more comments.
Okay.
First, again, I just want to thank all the staff and leadership for all the progress that's been made to get us to number 19. It's again, we've said it over again and again, so I don't want to take away from all the progress that's been made. I secondly wanted to throw out there while we're in the public meeting, since that I could consider that you go into performance index if we put some sort of floor on the overall ranking, because again, I don't want to go back to those days where we're 65th and feel good about ourselves if we go up in the performance index. So that'd be one thing I'd throw out there. And then third, I just to this point of that we're in some way would be considered to be rooting against other districts. That is absolutely not anything that I would view, because I just know what our students are capable of and look how far our curriculum has come, how far our staff has taken our students in the past couple of years. I haven't heard a compelling reason that says we can't be top 10 or the best. I know it's hard. I know that it's, we've said it again and again. The path gets steeper as we get to the top. But, nobody has said, and I want to hear it. If there's dialogue and say, our kids aren't capable. Our staff isn't capable of taking our kids there. Then let's have that dialogue. But right now, it's like to take the foot off the gas a little bit and say, let's kind of tweak the measure for sake of continuous improvement. I mean, I want that continuous improvement, but we know that what our kids are capable of compared to the rest of the state of Ohio, and I want to continue to go down that path. So, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you.
Try to give Michael a chance to get back, so we'll speak slowly.
I'm the next agenda.
You are the next item. Discussion item B is board policy.
So Board of Education members, tonight there are 5 policies that are presented for you. One is specifically new that actually came out from Neola, based upon recommendations through changes for administration of Narcan or naloxone in emergency situations in public school districts. So we are in the process of actually securing, based upon conversations with the New Albany Plain Township Fire Department, the accessibility for nurses, clinic aides, and select administrators to have access to the administration of Narcan on the school campus. Specifically, so there's a policy that's been proposed based upon said action to move forward within the school district. The other policies that are presented tonight are updates based upon changes through state statute or some federal regulation that changed specifically related to procurement. That are incorporated within interscholastic athletics or the finance department specifically for purchasing, bidding, procurement, for grant-funded projects or crowdfunding. So Ms. Jenkins or I can answer specific questions you may have related to them, but substantively, the policy for procurement administration of naloxone is the one that actually has the greatest amount of impact and change to the school district, simply because it will provide us the opportunity to have it available for a medical emergency on the school campus, again, only to be administered by persons that are properly trained to administer Narcan. All first responders now carry Narcan. It's commonly used in our conversations with Plain Township Fire Department on a regular basis. It just introduces it to be accessible within the school campus in the event such an emergency should arise prior to the arrival of the first responders.
Any questions? Okay. We're at our first opportunity for public participation. With no one, I will request a motion on superintendent's items A and B.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Newhoff, Ms. Kalinowski, Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you. President McClellan, Board of Education members, the personnel section, standard employee action items continue for the 2019-2020 school year for hiring for resignation purposes and or ticket takers, volunteer coaches, supplemental contracts, all standard employee action items based upon changes that are happening within personnel. Letter B this evening includes, for general business purposes, the approval of a senior waiver, the student teaching agreement that is standard, that comes from a public university to offer student teaching opportunities within our school district. And then the third one, I just want to say, this has previously been on agenda, but National Geographic, I explained at a prior Board of Education meeting, we have an incredible opportunity to work with National Geographic's Geo Inquiry, and their attorneys actually suggested reducing some of the restrictions in the previously approved memorandum of understanding. So the one that's presented tonight will replace the former, and it actually is more broad-based and honestly better for the school district. So we're going to accept it through recommendation through the board that we delete the previous one and approve the new one that the attorneys are actually suggesting from National Geo.
Any questions on those? With none then, I'll post the roll call, please.
Mr. Newhoff?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
President McClellan?
Yes. Now I will accept a motion or request a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. Mr. Newhoff, Mr. Bush, roll call please.
Mr. Newhoff?
Yes.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski?
Yes.
President McClellan?
Yes. We are adjourned. Our next meeting is Monday, September 20th.